Okay, so there's I'll give this like a little bit of a two-parter. The very first thing I ever did on stage, which I wouldn't call it is technically acting. I was taking Latin. I was in like an accelerated public school for academics. And I was taking in the sixth grade at 11 years old, I was taking Latin. And I continued to do that in the seventh and the eighth grade. And in my seventh grade year, they had this Latin competition in our county. I don't know why I keep doing quotes. I don't know. It actually was Latin competition. It doesn't mean anything. But I did like a Latin. I think the quote should have been around competition because it was a little silly. But it was a Latin competition, and we would do things where like people would compete on Greek history. That was somehow rolled in with Latin. And some people do, they would do art where you'd build a physical piece of art that was based around that period. And one of the competitions was memorize this giant section from, I think it was maybe the Aeneid or something like that, and you memorize this huge speech in Latin. And it was pronounced perfectly, and you stand in front of people and you dramatically, it was dramatic, oration or something like that. And I did that, and I didn't memorize it all the way, but I had a lot of gusto in my performance, so they gave me second place. And then the very first thing that I did, by the way, I'm still like pre-growth spurt, rail thin, nerdy kid all this time. I got pushed through some teachers at that same school. They said, you're really comfortable with public speaking. We would think it would be great for you to go to the School of the Arts and do their summer musical. And summer musical was like, if you audition, you get in kind of a situation. Like, you just have to show up and you're in the show. So there was like 150 people in Annie Get Your Gun. And the teacher basically, or the director, stood up one day and he was like, all right, everybody who wants to take this summer seriously, come over here. And everybody who kind of just wants to hang out with their friends and like be on stage, go over there. And so those people all ended up in the chorus, and everybody else would audition for roles. And I auditioned, of course. I was like, I can play one of the leads in this show. Never done a play in my life. And of course, that's not what they cast me as, because it was a School of the Arts where everybody was actually skilled and talented. I mean, like, there are people who were in that show who have been on Broadway many, many times now. You know what I mean? It's like it was full of actual talent. But they did cast me pre-growth spurt once again as Act 1, Scene 3, Little Boy. And I had the first lines of the play, and they literally had a human being standing on stage right who would hold my shoulders because I couldn't tell when the overture ended, and he would push me out on stage, and I would run out and scream, "Indians! The Indians are coming!" In the 1996 very un-PC version of that script, and that was my first time on stage, and we did the opening night of that play. My mom came that night because she had to drive me there, and we were walking to the car, and she remembers this story a little bit better than I do, but I stopped her and I pulled her and I said, "That's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life." And she started laughing. She was like, "What are you talking about?" And I was like, I'm gonna be an actor. That's what I want to do." She was like, "Okay." I'm like 13 years old. I'd never done a play. And I continued to not do a play until I was 16 years old. I mean, that was the first time I actually did a real play, not a musical. And that was it. That was my first experience on stage. Fast forward a few years, though, I'm 16. I do my first play. And two of the actors in it, in fact, one of them, it's a 3-man play, and one of the guys is playing Aaron Burr in Hamilton on Broadway, and the other guy is lead singer of a very successful band that came out of Jacksonville called Yellow Card. And then I ended up, the Aaron Burr guy ended up graduating that year. And he calls me up and he says, "So listen, I'm going to this great college. I think you can get in." And I was like, "What's the college?" And he was like, "It's called Juilliard." And I was like, "What's Juilliard?" It's like, show up to, he told me all about it. Of course I researched it. I mean, it was a name that was sort of in the back, but I really didn't know anything about it, nor did I think that it was realistic that I could get in. But it was a great phone call, and I auditioned, flew to Chicago, auditioned for a bunch of colleges, one of which was Juilliard, And in September, I got into the school, and the first time I set foot into that school was my first day. Um, just to mention my first time living outside of Jacksonville, Florida, in my life. Jacksonville's the largest city land area wise, to the most population dense in the country. And, suffice to say, my mind was exploding. When I was at that same high school, it was a very fortunate atmosphere. It was very much like Fame. Like, I mean, as silly as that sounds, we weren't like, we didn't break out into group song, but there were in like the hallway where I was studying, people doing scenes in the hallways and dancers walking in full ballet gear. And there were statues built by the students in the courtyard. And it was very much a wonderful creative environment. And because of that, on the rare opportunity that films would stop through Jacksonville, Florida, we would get some of their people to come and talk to us, or if somebody was doing a play, the actors would come talk, etc. And this particular time, a film was being directed by a gentleman named Peter Weller, who was you will know better as the bad guy in the new Star Treks in the first couple. The general who was running Chris Pine, and he was also famously RoboCop, the very original RoboCop. So this guy comes in, and we all know that he's RoboCop, and the very last thing that he tells us, to a bunch of high school kids, by the way, this is a really serious story, but he sits with us and he tells us this tale of Marcus Aurelius as the Roman Empire, or as the emperor of the Roman Empire. And he had this deal where when a big battle would be won, his general that won the battle had to ride through this grand parade through the streets of Rome. And they would throw this gigantic celebration, and it was required that they went through and they were exalted and experienced it. But if you know Marcus Aurelius, he was also a great philosopher. So the other thing he required, he said, you have to get the fanciest of all your chariots, the nicest of the nice of all your horses. And you have to get the poorest of the poor, though, the dirtiest of the dirty, the most worthless of the worthless of your slaves. And they have to stand next to you in that chariot while you're going through this parade. And the entire time he will be whispering to you, all glory is fleeting. And it was a beautiful kind of way to set it up for me that you can't, no matter how much success you have, no matter how, big you might feel in your brain, it will all disappear at some point, whether it be to the worms or whether it be, the following year or to critics or to whatever, but that it's all going to disappear. So enjoy it, but stay grounded with the function of it and keep focused on what you should be focused on, which is not the parade. It's the work. So I like that one.